Hey guys, in this video clip, I'm going to demonstrate to you on the concept and calculation of risk of individual properties. So I will demonstrate it through an example. Under the overall file over here, I select this example 4 in this presentation. So let's look at this. When we have 3 market scenarios, and with each of the market scenario assign a probability and the possible return of individual properties named property A or property C. So let's look at this. How to calculate the risk for each individual property. So first of all, let's look at the formula of calculation of each individual property's risk. In investment world, we use the terminology standard deviation of return for an investment as risk. By the means, in the formula we can see under 3 market scenarios, and there are 3 key terms with those multiplies and denoted under different colors. And we can see under market scenario 1, we do need information or probability under scenario 1 times the overall term in these parentheses is about the deviation of property A's return under the first scenario from the expected return of this property. So this deviation will capture the spread of potential return of this property that could be different from investors' overall expected return on this property. So for each market scenario, we will calculate this deviation. And then the overall deviation will be considered as a part of this weighted average across 3 market scenarios. And we add these kind of deviations all together. Then at the end, we have a square root for the overall summation term. Then we will get the risk of return for an individual property. And the same process will be applicable to the risk of return for any individual investment. So now, let's look at an assumed market scenario under this example. So for the first market scenario, and we have probability 0.2 and property A's return 18%. So let's look at this. So risk of return for property A equals, apply the formula that I showed you just now. So we have, first we need the probability under the first market scenario. So scenario 1, that's under the same rule. So probability 0.2 and the times, if you remember, and we have times the deviation of property A's return from its expected return. So this deviation, property A's return under market scenario 1 is 18%. And how far it goes away from the expected return. So link it back to the other video clip working through this expected return for property A, and we know property A's expected return is 12% in this case. So then we have 18% minus 12%, And in the formula, we also will raise this deviation to the power of 2. So I use this sign, yeah. Use this sign to represent the power of the power. So now we raise it to power of 2. Then we have finished incorporate the information for the first market scenario. So now let's move on to add the information from the second market scenario. Repeat the same process as we input for the first market scenario. First, we will need information under scenario 2 for the probability of the second market scenario would happen. So in this case, we have information of 0.6, right? And then times this deviation of property A's return from expected return. So property A's return under market scenario 2 in the same row, that's 12%. So then we have 12% minus expected return of property A across the 3 scenarios, that's 12%. So it will be the same as expected return as we input for the first market scenario. So 12%. And we raise this deviation to the power of 2. So now we have added the information from the second market scenario. Now we move on to the third market scenario. So we add probability under the third market scenario, that's 0.2 times deviation of property A's return under the third scenario, that's 6%. How far it is deviated from expected return, that is we minus 12%. And the same, we raise the part of this deviation to the power of 2. All right, so then for the overall part, this summation term, we need to remember, we need to add a square root for this calculation of risk. And for this square root, I still use the same sign to represent this power, but now this time we input the power as 0.5. So this process will give you the result and calculation for the risk of return for property A. And if you input the whole formula into a scientific calculator, it will give you an answer like close to 3.79%. That's the risk of return for property A in this example. So now, how to calculate the risk of return for the other property, property C? We will be able to calculate it by repeating exactly the same process, but just replacing those information of property A with the information of property C. So let's look at this. Risk of return for property C equals exactly same process. Now we need probability under the first market scenario, 0.2 times the deviation of property C's return under the first scenario from its expected return. So now first look at property C, the return under the first market scenario is much lower than property A. That's 6%, yeah, under this assumption. So we put 6%. And the expected return of property C, if you follow my previous video clip, to calculate this property C's expected return, you will see its expected return is 10%. So 10%. And now this overall 6% minus 10% captures the deviation of property C's return from this expected return under the first market scenario. So the same as for property A, we do need to raise to power of 2 for this deviation. Then this overall term capture the information under the first market scenario. This information is about the spread of return for property C under the first market scenario. So now let's add for the second market scenario. So first, we do need to see the possibility of the second market scenario would happen. That's 0.6. So the same, and we times property C's return under the second market scenario. That's assumed to be 10%. So we have 10% minus property C's expected return. That's 10% too. So we have 10%. Then still, conceptually, even though this term will be 0, but conceptually, we will raise it to the power of 2 to complete this formula. And then the same, we will add the last market scenario information. So probability under the third market scenario, 0.2 times deviation of property C's return under the third market scenario from its expected return. So property C could get 14% return if the third market scenario happened. So then we have 40% and minus this property C's expected return, 10%. And we will raise this deviation to the power of 2. So we have completed sum up all the 3 possible market scenarios, and we have incorporated the potential deviation of property C's return from its expected return under these 3 market scenarios. So now the final step, don't forget to add the square root for the overall term. Then we will still use this sign to represent 0.5 as the square root. If you input all the information into a scientific calculator, and you will get a result around 2.53%. So after completing process, and you will understand the process to calculate this risk of return for individual property. And for my next tutorial, I will introduce an important concept, covariance. And this concept will be used to the calculation of the risk of an investment portfolio. Thank you for your watching.